Roger that.
Maintain your altitude of 15,000 feet.
2 miles northeast. Turn left at 90.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of War Thunder with Nightcaster. Today I'm going to talk about the LocalHost. If you don't know what the LocalHost is, it is the black gray box in the right corner or right side of your screen, and this is visible from any browser. You simply let me first go through what it does. What it does is it keeps track of certain attributes with your plane. So when you look at this, you can see a number of values here, much like a HUD. The only difference is that this is available in a browser. You can't really see this in game. Right now, you're only able to see it because I have a local host that is kind of pulled over with an overlay on top of the video. I'm using OBS, so I have the capability of grabbing that part of the browser screen and just putting it out here on the video. So this is nothing that you can see actually in game. It's something that you could see when you're recording games though, which is nice. It's a nice feature to have, so you can go back and kind of review some things, look at different attributes that maybe you can't see or understand why you're flying a plane. So to get that, you simply use, and I'll put a lot of this detail in the description of the video, you can use the localhost address. It's http://localhost:8111. That's if you're using War Thunder with a browser on the same computer. That localhost is essentially just referring to your own computer. You can replace localhost with your actual IP address if you happen to be monitoring War Thunder from another computer or another screen, or from another computer or from a different network entirely. You could potentially do that. I haven't tried it from outside of my own local network, so I don't know if that's possible, but it could happen. So just keep that in the back of your head, okay? Now to go over the actual attributes here, I'm going to talk about them in the order. I've laid out a few here. There's a lot more important ones than this that you can grab from localhost, but I'm just going to go over the ones that I track during gameplay. And I'll start from the top, and that is IAS. I think a lot of people that are familiar with War Thunder know that IAS stands for indicated airspeed. It's pretty much what everyone goes by when they're trying to figure out their best climb, etc. So if you don't have that set up on your actual HUD in game, I recommend you change your speed indicator from true airspeed, which is the second value, to indicated airspeed, which is going to tell you how fast the airflow is going over your plane, right? And that's much more important when it comes to aerodynamics, lift, and all those types of things affect that more than true airspeed. True airspeed, which is the second variable, is your speed in relation to the ground. So if you're at sea level, IAS and TAS should be exactly the same, and as you increase altitude, your indicated airspeed will be different than your true airspeed. Your true airspeed will actually get higher compared to indicated airspeed the further up you go in the atmosphere, and that's just because the air gets thinner and you end up traveling faster than what's indicated. Third on the list is the YM/S, and then it's just simply your climb and dive rates. Positive value would be your climb. Negative value would be your dive. Most planes have these indicators in their cockpit, but this is a nice, easy way to track that through game replay. So it's really nice to have. WX, degrees a second, that's actually your roll rate. That's how fast you're actually rolling the plane around the center. So if you picture the fuselage as a circle and you rotate your plane, a positive value is clockwise and a negative value would be counterclockwise. So that kind of gives you, and it's in degrees per second, and that's why the DEG/S is there. That should give you a value about how fast you're going. So if your value is like 60, then you know it takes you approximately 6 seconds to actually roll your plane around. So that would give you a little bit of indicators about how long it would take you to complete that. Next would be NY. That is your load factor, G-force. Positive is a downward force. So if you're pulling up on the elevator, you're going to get that downward push into the seat. Negative would be upward, whereas if you're pushing the stick forward, you'd be kind of lifted out of your chair. So that is negative G-force. Most people can tolerate much more G-forces in the positive, where you're getting pushed into the seat, than negative, where your G-forces are pushing you out of the seat. And that's because if you negative G-forces, all the blood rushes to your head and it causes you to pass out a lot easier. So that's the reason for that. But that's a quick overview of what load factor and G-forces are. H is your altitude. I believe that is the true altitude. I honestly don't know for certain if it's adjusted for pressure, etc. I believe that's the true, just based on my experience. I believe this is just the true altitude. But, if anybody has any insight into that one, please leave a comment. Pretty straightforward there. Its value is in meters. M stands for Mach value. So this could change based on speed and elevation. But basically it's the value that you see when you're flying jets. I don't think it really is available in the actual HUD until you reach Mach 0.75, but that is the value that you can see at all times in the LocalHost. And I don't know, you might want to know what that is. I personally don't usually look at that, but maybe you do. Angle of attack. Now this is a little bit tricky, but essentially it is your angle from which way your plane is flying versus how much angle you are actually elevating. Okay, so picture going down the road, and as you're taking off, we'll say the runway, and your angle of attack is usually elevated because your plane has a slight lift angle to it. So if you look at the angle of attack on this plane, it's only a 0.03, but that's because it's a jet. Most biplanes or monoplanes from early tiers are going to have a much higher angle of attack, and that's because they are generally sitting on the runway with an elevated profile in the front. So that's essentially what the angle of attack is, and it's important in distinguishing how much you're actually pulling back in relation to the angle that you're going forward. Okay, it's a good value to keep track of, especially in jets, because a high angle of attack can generally create and induce drag, and that's true in all planes, but it's really important in jets not to have too high of an angle of attack. Angle of slip is the next one, and that is also similar to angle of attack, only we're talking about, instead of up and down, we're talking about left and right, whereas a positive value is to the right, negative value is to the left. And that's, you notice this a lot when planes are landing and they're landing slow, to adjust for wind. A lot of planes will kind of put their angle of attack toward the wind so that the wind doesn't push the plane off the runway as it's coming down. So that's just one good example of when you'll see angle of slip. Some people call angle of side slip, whatever your fancy. Okay, so that's what that is. And that is in degrees. So it's degrees off center, just like angle of attack, degrees off center. Angle of attack, positive is up, negative is down. Whereas angle of side slip is positive right, negative is left. Okay. The next one will be ailerons, and that is how much aileron you're giving. It's different from your roll rate, whereas aileron is how much input you're giving. So you can give it a lot of quick aileron and then revert it back to straight, but your roll rate will continue. So it's not exactly the same. It does affect your roll rate, but it's not the roll rate. So just realize that what I'm talking about here around aileron is the actual input that the ailerons are having on the plane. That could be important if you're trying to track, how much input can you give the plane before it's too much. Something like that, Positive is right, negative is left. Tends to be true for all these things. Up is positive, negative is down, positive is right, negative is left, etc. So elevator's the same thing. Positive, up, negative, down. The amount of input that you're giving. And all these values are adjusted with the instructor if you're flying mouse aim. So this can give you an indicator about how much it's being corrected at times. If you're not touching the keys and you see a lot of rudder or a lot of elevator, ailerons, etc., that's the instructor, okay? Rudder, positive is right, negative is left. Pretty similar. And now we'll get into the last two, which are flaps and gear. Flaps, as a percentage, 0% would assume that the flaps are raised. 100% is landing. Generally 20% is your combat flaps, and 33% are takeoffs. But the actual display that you'll see here is generally, in real time, you'll see these go up and down as I change them. You'll see them actually change percentages. It's not just 0 and then automatically 20%. It's actually going to tell you the actual value at the time that you put them out. And some planes do this faster than others, and it'd be a good way to track just how slow or how fast you can switch between different flap settings. Same for gear. I'm not going to do that because I'm really not in a position to actually do that unless I take off, and that's something that we can look at, but it's really no different than the flaps. So here you're going to see all these different values start to change. You can kind of look at those while we're taking off. I'm just going to give it a little bit of takeoff flaps. And as we get off the runway, I'm going to retract the gear. And you see the gear takes virtually no time to retract. Maybe just a couple seconds. And we're off. And so now here's some aileron input, some left and right. You can see those change. A little bit of elevator. Positive. Rudder, left rudder would be negative, right rudder would be positive. And as you can see, the angles of attack change as well. Angle of slip, all that. So it's a real nice feature to have if you're gonna analyze your game. It's probably not a bad idea to add this to your replays so that you can kind of follow along with a lot of the things that you're doing. Maybe you could get some keys onto what you may be doing wrong. Maybe you're turning a little too tight into certain situations. Maybe you're giving too much angle of attack on some approaches. Maybe you need to know your Mach value or your roll rate on certain planes. So we can kind of analyze that here. What's the roll rate of this plane? Well, it's pretty quick. So I didn't see the exact value because I'm flying the plane. I'll have to analyze that in replay. But from what I could tell, it was about 4 seconds. So I would guess that this is probably, what's 360 divided by 4? That's about 90 degrees. So just based on what I see, I'm going to say it's roughly 90. And, we can kind of confirm that with this in the replay. So anyway, guys, that's it for me tonight. Hope you have a good one and learned a little bit. Subscribe if you found any of this content useful. If you have any ideas on what else you'd like to see, please leave me a note. Thank you and good night.